Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Addison Galambos. On this show, we explore the path to mastering bonsai outside of the traditional apprenticeship model. Today, I'm going to be interviewing someone I view as well along that path and who I've personally learned a ton from. We'll be diving into his experiences and path, and then also discussing one of the most important parts of learning bonsai, how to choose your teacher. You've probably seen his work on Instagram, in Bonsai Focus, or in the Pacific Bonsai Expo, so I'm excited to welcome Sam Tan to the podcast today. Welcome, Sam. Thanks for being here.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
We have quite a few bonsai conversations in your little workshop there, so excited to record some of these and see what kind of discussions it brings up for folks.
Well, I'm known to talk about bonsai from time to time.
That is very true. Sam's the only person I know who, in a 4-hour car ride, can fill the whole thing with bonsai talk. So he's definitely the right person to have a chat with about bonsai. If you could just start with, how long have you been doing bonsai? And could you just describe your journey at a super high level, the kind of arc of your learning throughout however many years you've been doing it?
I think I'd say I probably started in 2017. So what does that make it, like 7-8 years now? Though when I started, it was pretty casual. Had bought my first plant from a local bonsai nursery. I was just diving into the rabbit hole, right? Kind of understanding how everything worked and kind of casually taking some group workshops here and there. So I think I really got serious probably between late 2018 and 2019 was when that really picked up. So, call it 7-8 years. When I started, the first person I reached out to for instruction was Jonas. He's in the area, right? Jonas of Bonsai Tonight. He's over in Alameda. Also took a few workshops with Eric Strader, who is in my neck of the woods in San Francisco. After that, at some point, I wanted, I wanted more. I wanted to learn more intensely. And so I was looking for kind of intensive workshops, multi-day kind of workshops. And that brought me to Michael Hagedorn's seasonals over in Portland. I did 3 of those. And then finally in 2019, an opportunity came up where I got to intern at Bonsai Mirai, Brian Neal. So that was like a 3-month stint in 2019. I learned a lot. And then since then, I kind of go back to Mirai here and there to work on trees, help out from time to time. So that's...
Yeah, it makes sense.
Kind of it.
You mentioned at the beginning of your journey that there was kind of a casual, soft launch to bonsai, and then you kind of buckled down on it. What do you think fueled that transition from, I'm kind of slightly interested in this to, I'm going to go hard?
Well, I'll say everyone starts by dabbling. Bonsai is a bit of a dangerous rabbit hole, right? I was just talking to someone at the climbing gym the other day, and they're like, I grow cactus. Like, I've always been interested in bonsai. I'm like, well, come to the club. You meet a bunch of people, and who knows? For me, I guess I've always enjoyed going really deep in my hobbies. And so it was clear to me very quickly after getting into the hobby that bonsai, there was a kind of a far end of how far you could invest in the hobby, or in the things you could learn and the level at which you could practice at. And so I was kind of craving that. And that's maybe like a me thing, or how I like to do my hobbies. I'd rather do like 1 or 2 hobbies like really intensely than do 10 only casually. And so that was it. And also just, seeing high level trees around me at local shows online, like, kind of informed me about there being a higher level out there that I could possibly kind of achieve.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that complexity...
It's probably just me, though.
No, I think actually that's something that will resonate with a lot of people. I think the folks who do really pigeonhole into bonsai tend to be folks who are inspired by the complexity of it, right? Like, they're like, wow, this is something where there's always another layer of the onion to kind of peel back. It's something that both physically and intellectually you can really dig into. I wonder how much of that is inherent to bonsai, and I wonder how much of that is, it has its roots in Japanese culture and is very rich because of the length of time that it's been practiced, right? There's probably both variables to it, but yeah, I think that'll resonate with a lot of people who have a similar kind of passion for bonsai.
Yeah, I think bonsai is one of many hobbies where there's a deep craft to it. And I mean, in the parallel universe, I could be really into woodworking, or I could have, gone really into playing an instrument or something. So it's kind of like right time, right place, and right kind of hobby, I would say. That, at least for me.
You mentioned that you had a chance to intern at Mirai. Was that your first interaction with Ryan? Had you taken classes with him previously, or were you able to kind of start your education through the internship at Mirai whenever you started learning
I
from him?
had not taken classes with Ryan, though I did subscribe to his platform and I did watch it quite a bit. It was a really rich source of content, education, and inspiration. So, in that sense, I did learn from him. I was interested in his workshops when I was getting more serious, though I think online when I checked, they had like a 1 year wait list or something, and I was way too impatient to wait a year to kind of further my education, right? So, that didn't quite work out. And kind of by chance, one weekend when I was up in the Portland area for other bonsai stuff, I happened to manage to visit the garden actually through Randy Knight. So yeah, a bit of a, not that long a story, but basically, Randy forwarded me to Mariah, and Ryan happened to be there, and he happened to have time to accept the visitor, and we got to chatting. And at the time, I was already thinking of setting aside some time, taking time between jobs, kind of doing something different, and kind of investing in some of my passions. And so, I talked to him about it. He seemed open to it, and some months later, it kind of worked out and lined up with my availability and his need.
Awesome. Well, this might be a little bit of a leading question, but what do you think's been the most effective way for you personally to learn throughout your journey? Like, what are the top kind of resources you've used, and what were the top experiences in terms of accelerating your learning development?
Definitely some kind of in-person instruction was huge. You can only learn that much from watching videos and seeing someone talk about it. Yeah, in-person instruction, kind of repetition and kind of detailed feedback. I think those are the most useful for me at least. So you could do a lot of reps, for example, but if no one told you what's good or not, then you may not be improving. You could do a lot of reps, but if no one ever showed you in person how to do it, you might just be doing it wrong the whole time. And so you kind of need like all of those things, right? And you could also do a lot of reps at a workshop in front of someone, and if they never checked your work or gave you feedback, then you might not you might not know where you went wrong either. So I think all those things kind of have to line up for me.
I think that internship experience is very interesting, especially as a hobbyist, right? Where you were able to take some time between jobs. You were able to take some time off and dedicate it to bonsai. And that's something that's fairly, like, that's a reasonable thing or sacrifice for someone in their career to make. Whereas maybe going to Japan for 3 years or 5 years, wasn't something you could do and maintain your full-time career, right? So I'm interested. I mean, I haven't heard a lot of people doing that similar thing though. Maybe it's just not offered. Like maybe bonsai isn't mature enough in the US for that to happen. Or what do you think about that internship experience? Would you recommend others seek out similar opportunities if they're on the hobbyist path to getting good?
Sure. I will, well, maybe give some context here for people listening. I guess when I say intern, I mean, I live in San Francisco. Bonsai Mirai is outside of Portland, Oregon. So I moved there for 3 months and I lived on site for 3 months doing bonsai pretty much every day. I kind of had work hours. It wasn't like a kind of a sweatshop or anything. I work hours and personal time, but pretty much I was full time there and living there for 3 months, which was an awesome opportunity and not something that comes along very often. And when I was thinking about doing something like that, I knew some opportunities like that existed. At the time, I visited Japan a few times. I mean, personally, I enjoy going there for vacation, and me getting to bonsai was kind of convenient in that, in some trips that I took to Japan, I would go look at bonsai. And I knew a few nurseries or gardens there were at the time accepting kind of international students for kind of a short-term stint, right? So that was like a thing. I know like Kobayashi at Shinkanen, he did it. Taisho En, the late Urushibata elder, he used to have like an international bonsai school, and not sure what other gardens had
Koji
this kind of
Hiramatsu, I
short-term
think,
stints.
does that kind of thing right
Yeah,
now. Yeah.
I think he does that right now. I'm not sure if he did that back then. So I knew that was a thing, and in my mind, like looking for experiences, learning experiences more involved and intense than say a 3-4 day kind of intensive workshop. That was like the next step. That was the the only other thing I knew that was available. Between like an intensive workshop and a full apprenticeship. I certainly could not afford to move to Japan or anywhere for 3 to 6 years to do an apprenticeship. So that was the only kind of feasible way for me to advance my education in a more rigorous way, I guess. That was why I was looking for something like that. I guess I'd also read, before going to Michael's, to seasonals, Michael Hagedorn's, I'd read his book on his apprenticeship. It was a really fun read. I really recommend it for people kind of into bonsai, or even if you're not, and if you're kind of into just like, you're just wondering like what is it like being like a craft apprentice of some sort, right? It's fascinating, and I guess kind of like romanticize the idea of like just being focused on mastery of craft, learning of craft. For some period of time, it felt like something that would be like I would be into, you know. So I actually forget your question, but that's the context around why I was looking for like an internship short term stint like that, and why it appealed to me. Would I recommend it? Yes. I mean, obviously, it comes at this significant sacrifice. I mean, there is quite an opportunity cost of not working, and depending on what your day to day is, it might be very different working in the bonsai garden. I don't think a lot of these opportunities exist in the US. I don't think every professional at every time is going to have an opportunity like that available. If it is, and you are the right kind of fit and right kind of person that is willing to do that, I think it is definitely a way to get better, right? I mean, there is a reason why the traditional model to learn and like become a professional is to be an apprentice, right? Because day in, day out, you get a lot of repetition. Not only that, working in a professional setting, the stakes are higher, the expectations are different. And so that's another way that you push yourself. Working in your own collection is one thing where, if you screw up, whatever, you own it, and you move forward, you buy another tree. But if you're working on your teacher's tree, or a teacher's tree that's meant for a client, or a client's tree or something, then I think the expectations are higher, the stress level is a bit higher, even the kind of time and efficiency expectations are also higher. So all the things that kind of up the stakes and step your game up, right, or force you to kind of rise to the task. So super valuable.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm curious, if you could wave a magic wand and have another one of these internships, are there things you would change about it? Or do you think there's a specific structure that would work really well? Like, oh, go in this time of year? Or what kind of expectations should you set with the professional around the kind of work you want to do, or the type of feedback that they're willing to give, or the amount of time that you can stay? I'm just curious, like, if you have any thoughts on like what would be the ultimate structure for this.
It totally depends on the nature of that arrangement, right? For example, if this was like a paid educational opportunity, for example, right? Then maybe the expectations between the professional and the student would be quite different, right? Maybe you are there to receive 3 months of education, you're paying a certain price for it, and then it's more it's an extended professional service, and maybe it's more on the professional to kind of be offering you a certain amount of education, that you would expect for whatever price you paid, right? If it's kind of like an unpaid kind of situation, which kind of maybe more closely approximates an apprenticeship, it has to be mutually beneficial, if not maybe even more beneficial for the professional who's going to kind of spend, maybe host you, maybe be less productive to kind of teach you and onboard you, so that you can be productive as well. And so, and there's a risk associated with that. The professional will be giving you trees of their own, or potentially even clients, and then there's some risk of failure, right, or mishaps. So in situations like those, it has to make sense both ways, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why, like, kind of the unpaid, kind of like short term, like mini apprenticeship style model is not that available, right? Because in 3 months, like, depending on the student, like how fast are they going to learn, right? I mean, depending on where they're starting from, there's an initial ramping up period where the person is just not useful to you. Like, you as the professional is probably investing more time into the person than they are giving back in terms of productivity or help on trees, right? And then there probably is some kind of inflection point at which you start being productive, and you start being able to kind of do work for the person that is helpful, right? But it also has to be mutually beneficial, right? Because what the professional kind of the labor that they need, the help that they need, has to line up with what you want to do and learn. Because if the professional just wants someone to weed the landscape and like do kind of more superficial, not the bonsai skills you want to learn, then you could spend 3 months doing that, and like gain zero bonsai skills, right? And that would be an arrangement that is, much more favorable to the professional than it is you as the unpaid intern spending sacrificing months of their time, right? So it has to work out. I would imagine if I was a professional of a big garden and I could either monetize it as a long-term kind of like a really extended intensive workshop, right? For, probably a significant price, right? A host and teach someone for 3 months, like that should cost you quite a bit of money, I imagine. Or for unpaid situations, I don't know. I feel like that really has to be case by case because in the best case, you onboard someone for 3 months, they start becoming useful and productive later on. You would like them to come back and continue helping you on your collection, right? I think it would probably make more sense to get into that kind of arrangement of someone who you see coming back in the long term and being like a help to your garden. Sorry, I haven't thought about
No, that
how to
makes a lot
set
of
something
sense.
like this up. So
No,
pretty
no,
free form here on my
I was
thoughts
just
about this.
curious. I mean, I imagine the most valuable experiences for you when you were at Mirai were doing some body of work and then getting Ryan's direct feedback on it, right? Of like, hey, you did this wrong or you should have done this differently, right? Like that was probably the most impactful for you, right? And then it was just, how much time did Ryan or whoever have available to give that kind of feedback within the structure of your kind of internship
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
and
getting
the
to do the
reps
work.
on specific types of trees that you might not have in your own garden or at home, right?
Getting the feedback, like I said, kind of the stakes being up quite implicitly from kind of working on someone else's trees or kind of like in a professional setting, right, where these trees may be sold. And, that
That
changes your
increased
mindset as
pressure and
well.
yeah, that makes sense. So that was one of your first experiences with being in that environment of, yeah, like there's stakes beyond your own trees. Like there's the
Yeah, and you
professional
got to own the work from
stake. Yeah.
start to end, right? Because even in much shorter term workshops, 1 day, even 3 day, you don't have to you don't always have to finish the work. If you don't finish the work, well, the professional have to figure out some way to get that thing finished or fixed or whatever, right? Or if it's your own tree, whatever, you can take however long you want. But if you're on a 3 month stint, then you gotta finish your work and then move on to the next one. Being able to work a complex tree, end to end is really like something not a lot of people get the opportunity to do. So very valuable.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm curious to see how the ecosystem in the US matures and whether there's, how the apprenticeship model or this kind of internship model, we'll call it, matures within the US I think as these businesses become larger, there'll be more chances for things like that as well, right? Because might be more likely for a professional to be able to house someone, right, and get value out of that person. When you're a professional, when you're one person with just your garden in your backyard and you're renting a place, like you probably can't really support that type of model as easily. So
Yeah, I think the necessity really kind of breeds this kind of opportunity, right? Yeah, because if you are a professional with a very small collection, 30 to 50 trees, something, and your work schedule is such that you can maintain all of them, then do you really need to take the risk on, someone who could mess it up and will take a lot of time to ramp up, right?
yep,
But then once you start having hundreds of trees and it's actually not feasible for you to keep all of them in the shape that you want, like it's maybe better to take the risk on, someone who can help and, get more trees moving forward than not at all, right? Um, I think about that sometimes with like having people come help out with my trees. I have a small collection in my garden, 30 to 50 trees. Sure, I could use some help sometimes, but when it comes to the really high stakes, design oriented work, restylings, and so on, like I want to do it and like I have the capacity to do it. And so I don't really feel good about, I wouldn't feel good about getting a lot of people to come help just do the menial tasks because they won't really get to learn that much. But if I'm gonna let someone do some of these more involved, higher stakes, higher risk work, then you know I need to know that I can trust them. I need to kind of have a plan for it, right? Before I have them come over. So it's definitely something where you need to have, I think, a big enough operation for it to make sense.
yeah, that's a very interesting kind of conundrum, and I think it definitely speaks to you being in a specific stage of development within your bonsai career, right? Where now you have a large enough collection where that's a consideration for you, right?
Oh no,
Um,
well, I don't think I have a large enough collection. I mean, I have a semi-large collection that I'm a little behind on some task. It would be really great if someone could help me, could weed my bonsai or pinch all my redwoods for me all the time. But I would feel good about asking people in the community to come over and help me do that because, you can only, you maybe you can do that once or twice and it'd be interesting. And, if you're coming by every week just to pinch redwoods, you're very soon going to learn all there is to learn about pinching redwoods, right? And you're probably going to want to learn a little bit more. But how many redwoods are there to style and wire or prune? My collection, 5 to 8 of them, So not that much opportunity, get your hands on that kind of work.
Yeah, it makes sense. Cool. Well, I know like I got started working with you when there were scopes of work that needed a second set of hands, like repotting a large tree or something like that, right? And so there are some opportunities where it's like, yeah, the design and styling of a tree, maybe an extra set of hands can speed up the wiring process, but you don't necessarily need two sets of hands to do any of the specific actions sometimes. Maybe like guy wiring a branch or something, but there are other scopes like repotting. And that's actually how I got started in general in bonsai, was helping with repotting. So I think that's a great way for folks to get started in other people's gardens. Like people aren't often going to push back on a second set of hands when they're repotting. And that's a very technical, and like there's a lot to learn within repotting. So it's a good place to get started volunteering, I think. That's how I got started initially at the bonsai garden at Lake Merritt, and then with you as well in your collection. So that can be an interesting avenue for folks to start learning too.
Yeah, that was you came in at the right time. I was getting bigger and bigger trees that needed more and more complex repots because they're collected, and it's really useful having someone hold the tree in position while I work the root ball or while I tie it into the container, right?
Yeah,
Um,
make sure you nail the angle.
that
I
being
guess
said,
now
given my
you've
setup and the
replaced me
size of my
with,
collection, oh no, well, no, well, I don't think I've replaced you quite yet, but I am trying to get better at also learning how to do some of those things myself so that, I'm able to, in case a tree really needs to be repotted and you're on a long vacation or, all my friends are on vacation.
yeah. No, I was just making a joke about the cabinet jacks that you'd been using.
Oh
Those have
yeah.
been helpful as well for kind of propping up trees at specific angles and stuff like that
Yeah.
during
I
the
mean, you have
repotting
to learn how to
process.
do all these things on your own because you can't always count on someone else being there.
Yep. Yep. Yeah,
So,
I think that's smart. Kathy Shaner, actually, when I first started learning bonsai at the bonsai garden at Lake Merritt, I can't remember exactly what she said, but something along the lines of like, oh yeah, like you gotta just figure out how to do it. Like she would just go and repot this like 150-pound tree all on her own, and that definitely I think is a stage in the mastery process of bonsai, right? Like when you really get up there, like when you see Ryan do trees on Mirai Live or something like that, right? Like he doesn't need a second set of hands; he can do it. So I think that's definitely
yeah,
a stage to aspire towards.
makes sense. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I before we kind of move on, I wanted to touch on one more thing that I think is kind of interesting, which is, do you think you have innate traits or talents that have helped you develop in bonsai? I feel like in general, you're regarded as someone who's very quickly upskilled within bonsai. And so I'm curious like what you attribute that upskilling to. I mean, obviously like time and effort, but I'm curious if you think that you have any specific like things that predispose you to be good at bonsai.
Well, I've invested very deeply in multiple hobbies before in my life. Before, I guess my biggest hobby before bonsai was dancing. I do popping. I think I talked about this on another podcast, but I was pretty deep in the street dance game. Been doing it for like 2 decades now, and also went down a rabbit hole there of mastery and just learning the craft, finding the best people, learning from them, competing in the competitions. And so I guess from that experience, and actually a long time ago, even before that, this was around high school, I was very much into esports. And I started a competitive Dota team back then and was competing on some big stages, which was cool. But I think from all those experiences, I kind of learned what it took to get better, like get to the, I don't know, 90th percentile, 95th percentile. There's a certain kind of grind and, determination, reps, regular practice, discipline that it takes to get there, right? So, in that sense, I've seen what it looks like to take a hobby very seriously and invest into it and get better. And so I felt like bonsai was going to be similar in some of those ways, right? I kind of invested that same kind of energy and passion and focus into it. So I think there's definitely that. I've always enjoyed the kind of design and aesthetic part of bonsai, and I probably do have some predisposition to art and aesthetics. I mean, I guess as a kid, I've always been like creating, drawing things. I did up to high school. I was like a studio art student. I mean, it was one of many subjects I took. Never did it in college. Actually, in college, I got really into woodworking too, my senior year. So I've always enjoyed making and creating things in my hands and like creative, artistic things. I mean, I just said I was into dancing before this, and um, that's a bit of an aesthetic practice as well. And so I think I have no idea if that's like innate or whatever, right? But it's something that has always resounded with me, and so I think maybe I picked up on design patterns, kind of aesthetic balance, like all the things that are necessary to actually execute good bonsai, aesthetic bonsai design, right? I might have picked that up a bit faster than the average person, but I don't know. Anyhow, who's to say my work's really that aesthetic? But I like what I do, and people have told me it looks good. So
It's
there
definitely
must be
very
something
good,
there.
and you're just early in your journey too, so it can always get better.
Sure.
I'm curious. I mean, essentially, it sounds like you said, "Hey, there's a formula to get to 95 percentile or 90th percentile that you've discovered in your journeys so far in other hobbies." Could you outline a few of those components to like what's the formula, that you've devised?
I have not really thought about this explicitly, and I will also put out a disclaimer that you probably shouldn't take advice from people successful at what they do, because it's like taking bodybuilding advice from like the world bodybuilding champion, right? Like it's actually probably bad advice because they probably don't recognize the things that like they're inherently good at or are unique to them that put them in that position, right? And then you kind of construct the narrative or like why you got here. But you really should be asking a trainer, someone who's really good at teaching. But if I was to guess, generally speaking, I try to find the people who are the best, the people who are legit, the people who are well regarded in the community, right? Find a good teacher, find good instruction, get the best instruction that's possible to you, right? Practice whatever it is like regularly and diligently, and like always push to the point of some kind of discomfort, right? If you're not like pushing yourself, then you're probably not improving. um if you're getting comfortable too quickly where possible, if there's any kind of competition, or not just a competition, but like
Public
mm,
forum for
yeah, some kind of community events that kind of like benchmark you, you should also challenge yourself with those things so that you have some kind of incentive or way to kind of track, broadly speaking, your improvement and where you are in the larger community, right? Because if you just practice, what you did in like in your hermit cave, right? You just don't see what everyone else is doing, and you don't see what other people think of your work, and generally speaking, like you're not really able to gauge, kind of where you are, right? I mean, there are always going to be a few creative savants who can like just come up with the most awesome thing in the world in the cave. But I'm not that kind of person. I'm not actually that creative or that artistic. So it's nice to see where I am kind of
yeah,
in the
have like
game,
external
whatever.
validation as a guide.
Yeah, yeah, whatever the game is.
Yeah, it makes sense. The meta. Yeah, so that's curious. So you kind of outlined three things. One was choose a good teacher that's at the top of the game so that hopefully you're getting effective reps, right? And then you're
Sure.
saying push yourself to the edge of discomfort in your practice of the hobby, right? Don't get complacent. And then you're also saying participate in competition or benchmark yourself in some way externally so that you have a more kind of objective proof of progress, right? So you can kind of benchmark yourself a little bit more
It's
easily.
motivation plus feedback.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
It
that
feels
makes
good.
sense.
It feels good to do well in, whatever kind of benchmarking kind of activity you're engaging in, right?
Yeah.
At least for me, I'm like a naturally kind of competitive person. Like even if, bonsai is not a competition, but it feels good to, have little wins, whatever that is. Oh, I got accepted to this show, or
Absolutely.
yeah, man, my tree won a prize, or
I think it's kind of hard to find those opportunities in bonsai sometimes. Like, at least in the Bay Area, we have a juried show, I guess, of the Pacific Bonsai Expo, which is fairly recent. And that is a thing that you can aspire to, right? And then also,
sure.
there's the Joshua Roth competition at Bonsai Rendezvous, right? So there's these two kind of things that you have to apply for and be accepted for. But in general, like in Japan, there's many more chances to have that kind of juried or judged public opinion of your work. I mean, I guess you can look at like Instagram followers or something like that as some sort of proxy, or like comments and feedbacks that you get on online forums. But I think it would help accelerate the US bonsai scene if there was more of those benchmarking opportunities out there, right? Because outside of those, it's hard to get that kind of public validate.
Yeah, yeah, I guess in bonsai there aren't that many, especially in the US. Maybe more juried shows. That's a good idea. I mean, honestly, for me in my journey, there are people whose work and bonsai I respect, and kind of getting their feedback is one way to is one way to benchmark myself, right?
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Um, but yeah, it's tricky with bonsai.
I've definitely felt what you were talking about though, in terms of like this year I got accepted for the Joshua Roth competition, and that put a huge pressure on my back to force me to push myself throughout the year in preparation for that competition, right? Seeing the
Right.
level of the other folks in the competition and knowing that I had, I have a lot of work to kind of meet that level. I think that definitely I have put in many more hours to bonsai this year because I have that thing looming in the future versus what I would have done without that, right? So, and for me, I'm just trying to improve as much as I can, and this process of improving has just even highlighted more areas where I need to improve, or like where I know I need to seek additional instruction. So I guess it just highlights that those opportunities are good for helping push yourself, and those opportunities can help highlight areas for you to improve further.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, for me, something I did was I started taking professional work on the side. So I have a full-time job. I work in a tech company. So bonsai is not my full-time job right now, but I decided to take on professional work on the side. Professional tree work, demonstrations, and so on, to kind of push myself as well. And so working on client trees, seeing them enjoy the results, seeing them refer me to other people, getting more interested, more kind of interesting, significant kind of client work, bigger, better trees, and being asked to work on them, and also kind of, demonstrations, right, where, one, like, finish the tree and it looks good to me and people like it too. Those are all other ways of, one, pushing myself and out of my comfort zone and getting more reps, but also kind of getting feedback from people in the community, right, on how my work's being perceived. So there are other ways other than just competitions.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're saying there's shows, there's competitions, there's doing some client work, and then there's getting feedback from people at a really high level that you respect,
Yeah, that's what worked for me.
among
I'm not
others
saying like
probably.
everyone
But
should
yeah,
immediately start, like doing client work on the side, depending on whether or not you feel like you're ready, right? It just kind of made sense for me. Kind of, I knew there were opportunities around me for that kind of thing, and people wanted their trees worked on, and they were trees that would, you know, be good for my own skill advancement. So it all kind of lined up. But
yeah, it
that's what
seems
worked for
very
me.
efficient to get paid to do work that also helps you reach your goal of improving, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, it is nice. And again, there is like some progression there, right? You might start like, let's say you're working with a new client, they might kind of, they might be kind of trying you out and giving you less significant trees, and then as they are pleased with your work, maybe you get to work on their better trees. Or I also started helping out at the bonsai garden at Lake Merritt here and there, and like they at some point were willing to let me work on some more significant trees, and some of those went well, and people in the community go and see those trees, and they tell me it went well. So that's all good kind of feedback mechanism that worked well for me.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. I think this really ties into the mission of the podcast of kind of defining or figuring out what a path looks like outside of the apprenticeship model. And I think those those components that you talked about are definitely things that deserve some more thought in the future.
Sure.
Cool. I want to talk about how to choose a teacher. You touched on that as one of the kind of things that you find really important for learning any hobby, it sounds like. So I want to talk, and I was talking with Jonas last week, and he said that's his number one most important tip for folks is to, get in-person instruction from a good teacher. Find a good teacher early in your journey so that you can build your eye and make your journey much more efficient in bonsai learning. Did you know that his first experience in bonsai was meeting Boone, his teacher, and he started learning from Boone the very first week he started in bonsai. So he had a consistent teacher, like very high caliber teacher right from day one for the first 15 or 17 years of his bonsai journey. I didn't know that
Oh wow.
before he chatted, but that is definitely a good way to get started is start with a top teacher your first day.
Oh
So
wow.
my question to you though is, yeah, can you take us through a little bit of, you know, what are the considerations that you take into account when choosing a teacher, and where along your bonsai journey do you think it's appropriate to choose a teacher?
Okay, so again, this happened one particular way for me, and so I'm going to retroactively create a narrative about it that I think is generalizable, right? But so take my advice with a pinch of salt. But I think my general advice is to find the best teacher available to you and start learning from them. I say this because when you start off, you don't know anything. You don't know what good bonsai is. You don't know what the universe of options is, different styles, schools of thought, approaches, species, whatever, right? And it's kind of really on your part of the teacher's job is to teach you all those things. Like what is good bonsai? What should we look out for? What are the techniques we should use, right? What species should we work on? Those are all things that, teachers will kind of like, differ in like, slightly. And starting with just like one teacher will kind of help you build an appreciation for the things like these big important questions in bonsai, right? And then eventually, once you get kind of a bit more maturity, you kind of understand the parameters of the game, right? That's when maybe you'd be a bit more aware of what else is out there and what other approaches there are, and maybe your interests change, right? And you end up moving on to a different teacher. Who knows, right? But if I was hypothetically starting again, I knew nothing about bonsai. I mean, I would probably, with all the resources available to people these days on the internet, AI, or whatever, you know, I would try to figure out what the highest kind of tier of bonsai practice looks like, right? Like if I knew nothing about, I don't know, I'm gonna throw a hobby I know nothing about out there. I don't know. I know
Curling.
almost nothing about, say, archery. I went to an archery range with my friend once, right? I knew nothing about archery, but I want to get really good at archery. I would probably ask, the first question I'd probably ask is like, well, what is the top archery competition in the world? Is it the Olympics? Is there an archery league, that's like, you know, maybe more prestigious than the Olympics, right? What are they? I'm gonna go to YouTube, whatever, online, and watch this company. Like, who are the top, who are the people placing top in there? And then of any of all these people, any of them in my area, are they from the U.S.? Are they from California, right? And if possible, like, how do I find this person? Like, where is this person? Or if none of those people from the US, like, what is the next best competition, right? Like, I think you can very quickly figure this out. Like, if you're doing this for bonsai, I don't think it would take a very long time for you to figure out that, say, the Kokofu in Japan is maybe one of the most prestigious shows in the world, right? With a long history. So you might then say, well, I'm in the US. Well, this show's in Japan. Like, how does this work, right? And then you might be like, well, who knows anything but I don't think it'll take that long for you to realize that, oh, okay, well, there are certain professionals in Japan that like prepare and grow and cultivate and like finish trees for the Kokofu. Who are they? Do they have students? Have people trained of them? And then who are those students? Are any of those people who train of these people in my area, right? Or maybe you might be taking the other shows like in the US, like what's the most prestigious show in the US? Oh, there's the National, there's the Pacific Bonsai Expo. Who's showing there? Like, are these people on YouTube? Did these people write a blog? Like, can I learn more about their work? And then I think very quickly you're gonna like shortlist a set of people that are maybe recognized in the community, right? In kind of prestigious or like kind of acclaimed forums, for showing their work. And then you can, that might give you like a starting pool of people to kind of consider, right? This just going onto YouTube, searching bonsai and like listening to the first person that shows up, because that probably isn't the way I would do it. I'll start from the highest level forum that I know of, and then try to filter people from there. So that's my practical advice for people. And oftentimes, like, you're going to be constrained by geography, time, and so on, right? So even if the best person's on the other side of the country, well, you may not have the time and resources to fly across the country on a regular basis, right? So then, you kind of have to work with what you have locally. But then, after starting with a teacher for a while, maybe then you can decide, is the hobby for you? What do I like? What is this teacher teaching that other teachers not teaching? And what other teachers teaching that this teacher is not teaching? And then maybe you can kind of pivot from there. And I guess the other piece of practical advice I would give someone starting off is to probably start with one teacher. I think it's when you start off and you don't know anything, if you start taking advice from too many places at once, right? You may actually kind of hamper your development, right? Because I think a lot of bonsai is like, it's aesthetics, it's technique, it's also horticulture, and all those things kind of work hand in hand. And most people have a system, right? And you want a system that works. And I don't think, everyone has like an explanation for why they think their system works. I don't think all of the explanations are actually necessarily correct, right? People are taking a best guess at why their system works. And so when you start mixing different systems too quickly before you develop a mature understanding of why things work and what does why they don't, you might end up with a hybrid system that just doesn't work. That's just going to slow you down, right? I hope
Yeah,
that makes sense. I mean,
that was a lot there. Let's kind of break that down a little bit. So
Sure.
the first point you made was when choosing a teacher, look at the meta, I guess, for whatever thing you're trying to
Find the
learn
best- find
and
the-
pick someone at the very peak of it. So I think you're saying benchmark, like credential your teacher based on results in some kind of public forum, right?
Sure.
And then
Yes.
and then
I was going to mention one thing. You kind of have to have to at least like their work, right? If they're so good, they're so well credentialed, and you look at their work and like, I do not relate with this at all, then maybe
well,
you're
I would say
like,
that
so-
goes against. I would say that actually goes against your earlier point, right? Because you're saying if you're early on, you don't know what's good or what's correct,
you don't know
right?
what's good. Yeah, but like,
But you still want to connect with it.
I think, when you're early in bonsai, everything looks awesome to you. I think it's more likely the case that everything looks awesome than only a few things look awesome. And so all I'm saying is, if you're studying with someone just because they're supposedly really good, but you have no intuitive connection to their work, then maybe you should still find, another credentialed teacher whose work you kind of like, at least superficially, before you understand anything. Because ultimately this is an aesthetic pursuit, and your basic intuition should kind of line up, right? And then maybe
It should look good.
you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
refine
that
it.
makes sense.
It should look good to you,
Yeah. So the other thing I think which is interesting specifically to bonsai is that it sounds like you're saying, and I would kind of agree with this, that Japan is the culmination of the art currently. And so a bonsai teacher should have some sort of Japanese lineage.
I'm just saying that if you Google, best bonsai, I don't know what sequence of things you would do, right? But if you did a bunch of searching on like most famous bonsai show in the world, I would say the show you would probably end up getting results for is the Kokofu, just because it's so well established and has such prestige and a name associated with it. Right? I think there are many other high level shows out there that you could work backwards from. I'm just saying you're likely to hit Kokofu because of what it is.
Yeah,
so
that
I
makes
don't
sense.
think your teacher needs to have trained in Japan, though it is on average a pretty good signal that that person has legitimate skills. It's not necessarily the case. I don't think like just because someone spent time in Japan, means they're necessarily good at bonsai. Right? Like not every, from my understanding, and again, I've never done bonsai in Japan, but not every professional, not every bonsai garden and nursery in Japan, like say puts trees into the top shows, right? So
Yeah.
it really, there's another level to this, right? So, and also I guess like non-Japanese trained professionals, there are much fewer of them, but have put out top quality work as well, right? There are people, who are self-taught. Okay, self-taught is again more rare, but there are examples of self-taught people who have put out very high level work. So I wouldn't say the Japan part is a must-have, but it's probably a good bet on average.
Yeah. The other thing you said that I found interesting was when you're just starting out, it might make sense to just start learning from anyone who's better than you and is willing to spend time with you. Essentially, like you might not be able to make that decision of who's that one teacher that I want to study with for my entire time in bonsai right when you start. And so dipping your toes in and like learning from someone who's accessible and better than you might be good enough to like start your journey, right?
Better if you and legit. It's very
Yes.
easy to be
Yeah.
better at you when you're starting from zero. But, I don't think you
Yeah.
want to learn from anyone who's just better than you. And also follow one system when you start. I think that's useful. Again, when you start mixing knowledge too early, it's risky.
Yeah, that's a point that I wanted to chat about that one as well. I think that's one where it's a little bit harder for me to instantly agree with. I think we talked about this before, so maybe we'll retread a little bit of that conversation, but the benefit as I see it to having a single teacher is like you're very efficient, right? You're going to go down the path that they've established and you're not going to be kind of diving off into different, red
And they
herrings
should
or
have examples, results of that technique they're teaching, right, in their
yep,
collection. So you can be like,
absolutely.
oh, well, okay, it works.
Yep. That makes sense. I think the flip side or the risk to that is like going down that like single path, you might have blinders on, right? Where, maybe they aren't doing something correctly, right? And if you don't have any exposure to any other options, then you can't make that decision for yourself, right? If you're only saying like, hey, I'm going to hone in on this one approach to doing things. So you can move very quickly, and like hopefully you have the validation of they have done this before and thus, you know, I I'm moving quickly in the right direction, right? But I think the benefit to studying with multiple people is that you well, one, like different people are going to have different approaches to teaching and maybe different things that they're trying to teach you, right? So you might get a broader education that gives you a
Sure.
base from which you can ultimately grow further. But yeah, I guess the risk is then, oh, am I really inefficient in my learning because I'm learning how to wire from three different people and they all have a little bit different approaches or ways that they do things. And thus, like, or they're all trying to create different products. And thus, like, I get confused about the techniques. So I think
Yeah,
there's definitely like trade-offs to having
and don't
one
get me
teacher
wrong. I think
versus
that at
multiple.
some point, you should definitely look at other teachers and consider learning from multiple teachers or another teacher that more aligns with what you want to do and what you think is beautiful, right? But when you start, the horticulture and the technique of bonsai is so closely tied together that when you start mixing things, things can go really wrong. I mean, an example would be, to decandle a black pine, like you need to have set it up correctly fertilization, right? So let's say you're learning from someone who doesn't decandle, right? Their fertilization regimen might be much, much less like intense or heavy than someone who is decandling. And if you just like, before you knew exactly how that whole thing worked, you followed one guy's fertilization advice, but another guy's decandling advice, you could set your tree up for, a huge disaster, right? Same for many techniques around controlling the kind of vigor, internode length, and so on deciduous trees, right? If you're fully defoliating a deciduous trees, not all professionals do this. You need the right conditions and the right setup for your tree to be able to tolerate that kind of work. So I think mixing things like that can be very dangerous for your trees if you do it too early before fully understanding how that system works, right? So not everyone is kind of reaches that realization that fast, right? I think once you like start having more maturity in your practice and understanding, that's when you can start. I think you should start venturing out. But you see what I mean? It's not just like stylistic differences. Those are a bit more kind of benign. And sure, one person wires clockwise and the other person wires counterclockwise. That's not a good example, but that is much less consequential than like performing techniques that could kill a tree, right? If other prerequisites are not fulfilled.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So you're saying the horticulture and the technique and the end result are all interconnected. And so you can't necessarily sub out different portions of those as you wish, right? You have to take it as a unit to create a specific product, right?
You really have to really understand and be confident like about what each technique or horticultural practice does, right? Before you start mixing them, rearranging them and saying, oh, maybe I can actually fertilize less, but do this defoliation at this time or this phase, and it's probably going to work. That's not something you figure out in your first year.
That makes sense. Yeah, yeah,
Usually.
absolutely. That's something that comes with like time and understanding over multiple cycles of experience and learning from the paradigm or like the framework that your teacher has set up, right? And like
Yeah,
observing that model that they've espoused works or doesn't work.
exactly. Because when you start working the black pine, they're going to be like, well, start putting on fertilizer at this time and keep putting it on until, I don't know, June 1st. And then we do this thing where we cut all these things off. And, that's all that's going to compute, when you start, right? And you should follow all those instructions exactly, for a teacher who's, in a similar climate and growing similar trees to you, right? you
Yeah.
start deviating from those instructions too early, and your results could be really different
Yeah, that
in a
makes sense.
bad way.
I've had an approach of kind of learning from a lot of different people, and I would say that the there is an aspect of, I have three different ways that I have to make pins based on whose, garden I'm at or something
Sure.
like that, right? So that does take extra headspace in your brain, but I also think there is some benefit in that, like, I've learned things from each of these individual teachers that I might not have taken into account within my bonsai journey otherwise, right? And I think early in your career, like, yes, it can be a little bit confusing to hear conflicting techniques, but it can also be good to learn how each of these different people are approaching things and take things from them, right?
True. True. I guess again, there comes a point, at which you realize what you want and what you're not getting from your teacher, and then you find other teachers.
Yeah, it makes sense. So one thing I wanted to mention was I was thinking just in general about what kind of advice I would give to folks choosing a teacher. And I think let me just lay out a few things and then get your kind of thoughts on it. Some of them
Sure.
line up with what you were talking about. So the first thing I think is you want to look in their garden and you want the trees that are in their garden to look like what you want your trees to look like. So I think you mentioned this point as well, but I think even whenever you're getting started and you don't necessarily know what's good and what's not good, I think to some extent, like you said, there is an aesthetic component or like a just a this is good or this isn't good, even if you don't know why.
You have to be
And so,
drawn to the work,
yeah,
some way.
exactly. So I think that's one component is like they should have trees that look like what you want your trees to look like. The other thing I think is super important, which maybe we didn't talk a lot about, was the teacher needs to be accessible. If you can only see the teacher, maybe they're across the country from you and financially it's tough for you to go visit there for more than like once a year for a 5-day period. Realistically, you're not going to learn bonsai in a reasonable time frame if it's not somebody who's accessible to you in a more frequent manner. So I'm curious whether you agree with this or not, but for me, accessibility is almost make or break. If it's somebody you can only, like, because of finances, because of distance, because of time, whatever, or because of their time, if it's somebody you can only see once a year, twice a year, you're not going to progress in bonsai under that level of tutelage, I think, at a very high rate. And so the accessibility of the teacher is actually very important.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense. That's a tough one because there aren't that many teachers, aren't that
Yeah,
many good teachers around. But I agree. I mean, again, once you get to a certain point of maturity in your practice and you have enough trees, then you have the ability to kind of, you can practice on your own, and then at regular times of year, when you go out and seek these teachers, you can get feedback and get the inspiration and practice, and then you come back and apply it to your collection. So it's not unworkable. You don't have to see your teacher every week, to get better,
totally.
but you do
I guess I
have,
meant more like early in that journey before you have the ability to kind of self-critique. But yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Later in your journey, those touch points can become less and still be an effective relationship, I think. Absolutely.
Right. Just given the number of teachers, and kind of very high level practitioners in the US, it's more likely than not, again, just speaking for the US or really most places in the world, like that the very best person is not going to be your neighborhood, or even that close to you. So definitely at some point when you want to get to a higher level, you're probably going to have to go out of your way in some way to seek that instruction.
Yeah, absolutely. But maybe that just means that somebody more accessible that you can have more touch points with early, but
Sure.
still is credible, like that could be a
Yeah.
better teacher for you early on.
Makes sense.
The other thing I think is your point around credentials. Like you want to make sure that there's some external validation that your teacher is doing work at the highest level, right? So I think that makes sense as a criteria for choosing a teacher. And then, I mean, I think in the US at least, there's the idea of your teacher should actually be good at teaching as well, right? So they should be able to impart knowledge to you effectively. So that's something that you kind of
You'll
get
find out.
yeah, exactly. You'll
You'll find
find
out
out.
pretty soon.
Yeah. Oh, one more
Also,
point
I'll
on
throw in
the,
there that the teacher probably should be doing like the part of bonsai that you're interested in. You know, as you and I both know, some people focus on different parts of the bonsai supply chain, right? If your teacher is primarily a grower, and you want to learn how to do finish work, if you have the option of choosing someone else who's like more focused on finish work, wiring and stuff, that may be a better fit for what you want to achieve, right? So it's just make sure you're picking like, the right specialization too. Or, if you have a teacher that purely specializes in deciduous trees and you really like big gnarly conifers or collected trees, again, you may not end up getting what you want out of that teacher.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think on the accessibility front, I think another important thing to point out is we get kind of caught up in like being able to physically see the teacher, but I think you also have to take into account the body of their work that's accessible online, right? So do they have content that you can consume either in a blog or a video that can help you learn their techniques even whenever you're not face to face with them, right? That does, I think, factor into how accessible that person is. So I think it's important for professionals to have either be accessible to their students physically or have content out there that helps people learn their approach, right? Whenever they can't be physically accessible.
Makes sense.
Cool. Well, that was a lot that we discussed today. So thank you for taking all the time. I wanted to kind of pose one final question to you. From my experience with you, at least, you seem very disciplined. So I'm curious if you have any mantras or like where do you get your inspiration from when you just kind of want to take your foot off the gas a little bit and relax in bonsai? Like what are your role models or inspiration within the art?
Huh. So you're saying when I'm
Like,
relaxing, like where do I get inspiration?
well, whenever
Like
whenever
aesthetic.
it's like, oh man, that was a long day. I want to, put the scissors down and maybe I'll come back to this next week or something like that. I don't want to finish this tree. Like, what do you think about to dig deep and get that last work done or, put the final polish on
Oh,
the
I see.
tree?
That then motivates me to keep pushing and
Yeah, exactly.
gosh, I'm not sure if a single thought comes to my mind like in those moments where I feel like it's a lot of work. I mean, I'll probably think back to my time at Marine during my internship and, just, you know, pushing myself, I didn't burn the midnight candle or anything all the time working on trees, but just knowing that I'm capable of working a bit past my comfort zone and kind of pushing myself, you know, physically and, mentally to some extent working on trees. Like, once you've pushed yourself in some way, like beyond your comfort zone, then you know what you're capable of, if you really like set yourself to it. So once you know that's possible, then kind of other instances of that discomfort become like less unsettling, right? Less demotivating. You're like, oh yeah, I can do this. Like I've done way worse before. Again, that's not to say my time at Mariah was bad anyway. It's more like, okay, well, I've done this day in, day out for some number of months before. This weekday night, assignment is no big deal. But yeah, it's not something I'm like consciously thinking about. That's a
Sounds
strange
good.
question.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. I know we've also quoted some Ronnie Coleman out there before.
Oh,
I
that's
was
what you're trying to
curious if
get out of me.
I was curious if that was your inspiration, but maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, yeah, it comes to physical discomfort, just having, any kind of like, I don't know, physical training, if you're ever an athlete before or anything, just like, if you've ever been pushed physically beyond your limits, there is a kind of like a medal of honor that comes with it, at least in your mind. So, oh yeah, again, like easy. This is easy compared to, insert X, really, really tough physical thing challenge that you've completed before,
Yeah, it
right?
makes
So,
sense. So it sounds like
yeah,
if discipline is a challenge or motivation, then go push yourself to do something really hard, and then that'll help you buckle down
yeah,
in the
yeah.
future.
For that stuff, I mean, stuff way in my past, like having done some high school athletics and being a military conscript for a bit. I've been pushed physically before, so bonsai is it's not that bad.
Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you, Sam. I think there was a lot of great nuggets in here, so I'm excited to kind of summarize it in the future too. But thank you for taking the time. And that's interested in checking out Sam's work, you can do so on his Instagram, which is at SamTanBonsai. Anything else you want to shout out, Sam?
No, not at all. Thanks for having me. This is a fun chat.
Yeah, I'm curious about how everyone listening has chosen their teachers and their thoughts on what we discussed today. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at Teeny Trees and give me some feedback or things that we maybe didn't think about. Thanks all. Have a good night.